My uncle pointed his fork at me across a table set with the Navy's good silver, and he said it loud enough for the next table to hear. Handouts? That's all she's ever been good for. Somebody always foots the bill. He was 3 glasses of red wine into the evening, and he had the particular confidence of a man who has never once been wrong in a room that would tell him so. My cousin Bradley grinned into his water. My Aunt Lorraine looked at her plate. My mother, Rosemary, folded her napkin into a smaller and smaller square, which was the only thing she ever did with her hands when Dennis got going and she had decided, again, not to fight him. I set my own fork down. I did not do it hard. I have spent 18 years learning that the worst fires are the ones you feed, and a raised voice at a dinner table is just a man holding a match and waiting to see if you will hand him the gasoline. I folded my hands in my lap. The 3 gold stripes on my sleeve caught the candlelight, and not one person at that table saw them, because they had decided a very long time ago what I was, and the decision had saved them the trouble of ever looking again. You could at least say thank you, Dennis went on, warming to it. Your mother's carried you since you were a girl. We all have, one way or another. And here you are, dressed up, drinking on somebody else's dime. The somebody else's dime was the United States Navy, and the dime was mine, but I did not say that. I looked at the young sailor seated at the end of our table, a petty officer named Simmons who had drawn the short straw of being assigned to escort the guest families and had ended up next to mine. He was staring very hard at his bread plate, the way you stare at something when you have realized the adults around you are behaving badly and you are too junior to fix it. It's fine, I told him quietly. Eat your dinner. I had faced a fire once that took the paint off steel and left it the color of a bruise, and I still could not make my uncle lower his voice. There is no rank that works on family. That is the first thing they never put in the manual. And then, at the head table, 40 feet away and up a small rise where the flag officers and the hosts sat under the seal, the guest of honor stopped talking. I did not see it happen so much as feel the room change temperature. A rear admiral, silver-haired in his dinner dress, blues with 2 stars on the shoulder boards, and a chest of ribbons that told a 30-year story, had been leaning toward the captain beside him, mid-sentence, one hand moving to make a point. And he had turned his head the way you turn when someone says your name in a crowd, and he had found our table, and he had found me. And he had gone still. The captain beside him said something. I read the shape of it more than heard it. Sir? The admiral did not answer him. Vivian. Dennis snapped his fingers in front of my face, actually snapped them, the way you would at a waiter who had drifted. Are you even listening? Typical. I brought my eyes back to my uncle, and I kept my hands folded, and I felt the old heat rise up out of my chest and into my throat. The heat I have carried since I was 25 years old, and I did what I have taught myself to do with it. I let it sit there. I did not feed it. I'm listening, Dennis, I said. I always am. That was the truth, and it was the saddest thing I said all night, and not one of them heard that either. Let me tell you who was actually sitting at that table, because the woman my family described and the woman in the chair had almost nothing to do with each other, and the gap between them is the whole story. My name is Vivian Sloan. That night I was 41 years old, a commander in the United States Navy, 18 years commissioned, a surface warfare officer with 3 deployments and 1 tour I do not talk about behind me. On my chest, above the 2 neat rows of ribbons, sat a single ribbon that most civilians would never notice, and every sailor in that ballroom understood on sight. It is green and white and red, and it is the Navy and Marine Corps medal. And it is the highest award the Naval Service gives for heroism that does not happen in combat. You earn it saving lives. You usually earn it in the worst hour of your life. I had never once explained it to my family, and they had never once asked, and both of those facts are load-bearing. I had spent an hour that evening in the corridor outside the ballroom, in front of a long hotel mirror, squaring the uniform away. It is a small ritual and a serious one. You run your thumb along the ribbon rack to feel that it sits flat. You check that the stripes are true. You look at yourself the way an inspecting officer would, without kindness, and you fix what you find. In the mirror, I saw a commander. When I walked back into the reception, my family saw a woman who could not hold a job and had rented a costume. There is a discipline to being underestimated that no one teaches you and no one thanks you for. You learn to let a comment land without letting it change your face. You learn that the small muscles around your eyes will give you away if you are not careful, so you train them the way you train anything, by refusing them what they want. My family had watched my face for 18 years and never once caught it move, and they took that stillness as proof that nothing was going on inside me when the truth was the opposite. The stillness was the evidence of how much was going on inside me. A calm surface over deep water is not the same thing as a puddle, though from above they can look alike, and my family had only ever looked from above. I had commanded sailors by then. I had stood watches as the officer of the deck driving a ship worth more than my hometown through weather that stood the coffee up out of the cups. I had written the evaluations that made careers and, twice, the ones that ended them, which is a heavier thing than people think. I had sat with a young sailor at 2 a.m. while he told me the thing he had not told anyone, and I had kept it, and I had gotten him the help without it costing him his future. None of that translated at a dinner table. There is no ribbon for the 2 a.m. conversations. There is no medal for the 18 years of not correcting the people you love, because correcting them would cost more than the insult did. They mistook respect for pity all night, because pity was the only reason they could imagine anyone treating me well. When a chief stopped to say good evening, ma'am, and stepped aside to let me pass, Bradley leaned to his mother and said, not quietly, "See how they have to be nice to her. It's like a charity thing." When a lieutenant I had mentored years earlier crossed half the room to shake my hand and tell me she had made department head, my uncle watched the whole exchange and concluded, out loud, that the young woman must have felt sorry for me. You cannot correct that. I learned a long time ago that you cannot correct that. A person who needs you to be small will translate every piece of evidence back into your smallness on arrival, the way a bad radio turns every song into static. So I stopped sending the signal. I let them be wrong. I told myself it was mercy, and most days I believed it, and on the hard days I admitted it was just easier, and being honest about the easier is its own kind of discipline. 18 years. That is a long time to let a room be wrong about you. But the truth had a price, and the price was not my pride. The price was that to explain the ribbon, I would have to explain the night I earned it. And to explain that night, I would have to say 3 names and stop at 2, and I had never yet found a dinner table I was willing to do that at. So I kept my hands folded, and I let my uncle point his fork. The story my family told about me did not start with the fire. It started years earlier, and it started, like most family stories, as a small, convenient thing that got repeated until it set like concrete. I was 18 when I took the Navy scholarship. In my family, that was not read as ambition. It was read as failure with a flag on it. Dennis ran a small contracting business. My father, Walter, worked for him, and the Sloan plan for a young person was to come up through the business, marry locally, and stay inside a 20-mile circle for the rest of your natural life. When I left the circle, Dennis decided I had left because I could not cut it inside it. That was more comfortable for him than the alternative, which was that I did not want what he had, and a man like my uncle would rather you be incapable than uninterested. I should tell you about my father, because the story does not make sense without him. Walter Sloan was Dennis's younger brother, and he worked for Dennis his whole life, and he was gentle in a way that his older brother read as weakness, and I read later as the only strength in the family. My father did not think I had failed by leaving. He drove me to the recruiting office himself, and on the way he did not give me a speech, because that was not his way. He just said, at a stoplight, looking straight ahead, that he had spent 40 years doing what was expected of him inside a 20-mile circle, and that it had been a fine life, and that he was glad at least one Sloan was going to go find out what was outside the circle. Then the light changed, and he never said anything like it again. I have held on to that stoplight for 20 years. It is one of maybe 4 things my father ever said that I would trade the medal to hear him say once more. He did not live to see any of it. He did not see me commissioned, though he knew it was coming. He did not see the fire, or the medal, or the money I quietly sent home after him to keep the house he had loved from slipping out from under my mother. He would have been the one person at that dinner table who understood exactly what the ribbon on my chest was, and he was the one person not there. And that is the arithmetic of a certain kind of grief that never quite balances either. Then my father died. That was 2008, and I was 23 and a very new ensign, and the family closed ranks around my mother the way families do, and in the closing they assigned everyone a role. Dennis made himself the head of the family and the protector of the widow. And somewhere in that first raw year, in a kitchen full of casseroles, the story hardened into its final shape. That Rosemary was carrying me, that the money flowed from my mother to me, that the Navy was a thing I was playing at while my mother paid for my life. "You do your little Navy thing," Dennis told me in that kitchen the week we buried my father. He said it kindly, which was worse. "Just don't come to your mother every time it falls apart. She's got enough on her plate." "I won't," I said. I meant it in a way he never understood. I did not mean I would carry my own weight, though I did. I meant I would carry more than my own weight, quietly, and I would let him keep the story, because my mother had just lost her husband, and the last thing she needed was a war at the dinner table over who paid for what. Below the waterline, nobody asked whose money I lived on. I want you to understand what a main machinery room is, because you cannot understand the rest of the night without it. It is the deepest working part of a warship, below the waterline, a 2-story steel cavern of turbines and reduction gears, and fuel and steam and heat, where the ship's power is made. It is loud in a way that gets into your teeth. It smells of fuel oil and hot metal and coffee. And in 2010, I was the damage control assistant on a guided missile destroyer, which meant that if anything aboard that ship caught fire or flooded or broke in a way that could sink us, it was my job to lead the fight against it. I knew every valve in that space. I knew every man who stood watch in it by his first name, and the name of whatever town he was homesick for. Down there, no one had ever heard the family story, and if I had told it to them, they would have laughed, because down there the only question anyone asks about you is whether the plant will hold when it matters. Ours held. It held because a lot of tired people made it hold, watch after watch, and I was one of them. And that was the first place in my life where what I actually did was the only thing that counted. Delgado worked in that space. That is the thing I have never said to my family, because to say it, I would have had to explain who Delgado was, and to explain who Delgado was, I would have had to explain how I knew him, which was that I knew every man on my watch bill the way you know people you are responsible for. He was 19, and he wanted to be a machinist's mate, and he kept a paperback in his coveralls pocket that he was too shy to admit he was reading. Some fat fantasy novel with a dragon on the cover, and when I caught him with it once during a lull, he turned red to the ears, and I told him the only rule was that the plant came first, and his book came second, and there was no third thing. And he grinned at me like I had handed him something. He called me ma'am the way the good ones do, with the respect built into the shape of the word, and no fear in it. I have thought about that grin more times than I could count. I think about it when people who never met him decide that my life has been easy. That is the cruelty of the family story that took me the longest to name. It was not that it made me small. I could survive being made small. It was that it made the whole thing weightless. My entire adult life. The fire and the metal and the boy with the dragon novel and the mother in the valley kitchen, all of it flattened into a woman who plays dress-up on the taxpayer. Being underestimated I could carry. Being erased was harder, because when they erased me, they erased him too, and he had already been erased once, and he was not there to object. So it fell to me, and I did it the only way I knew how, which was to keep him in the one place they could not reach, behind my own silence, and pay the cost of that privately, year after year. I learned young that some rooms judge you on your last excuse, and some rooms judge you on your next decision. I chose to live in the second kind of room. My family never visited it. They could not have found it with a map. Back in the ballroom, the Admiral was watching me. He was not hiding it now. He had turned his chair a few degrees, the way a man does when he has decided to keep something in his sight, and he was looking at me across 40 feet of white tablecloths, with an expression I could not read from that distance, except that it was not casual. My family did not notice. My family was still inside the small, warm world of my uncle's opinion of me, and in that world, nothing outside the family had ever mattered, so a 2-star Admiral looking at me was not data. It was scenery. Up at the podium, one of the hosts had begun to read the guest of honor's biography, the way they always do at these things, the long recitation of commands and campaigns and medals that is meant to make you sit up straight. I had been half listening, the way you half listen to a list of a stranger's accomplishments. And then the host said a year and a ship. In 2010, the host read, then Commander Whitfield took command of a destroyer that would, that same year, survive one of the most serious engineering casualties in the modern surface fleet, an event for which several of his crew were decorated for heroism. They heard a list of a stranger's medals. I heard the name of a ship and a year, and the word decorated, and I knew, with the cold, clean certainty of a compass finding north. Exactly who was sitting at that head table and exactly why he had stopped talking. Rear Admiral Thomas Whitfield. In 2010, he had been Commander Whitfield, the captain of my ship, the man standing on the bridge the night the main machinery room caught fire, the man who had to decide from 2 decks up whether to send people down into a burning space or seal it and let it burn with whoever was still inside. He had trusted my judgment that night more completely than anyone had trusted me before or since. And I had not seen his face in person in more than a decade. 16 years is a long time. Faces change. But some faces you would know in any light because you saw them once by the light of the worst thing that ever happened to you. The alarm, when it came in 2010, came the way it always does, without warning and in the middle of an ordinary watch. The general announcing system, the 1MC, the great flat voice of the ship, and then the words, no sailor ever wants to hear, stacked one on top of the other. Fire, 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 Class Bravo fire, main machinery room 2. This is not a drill. I was already moving before the last word. You do not decide to move. Your body has rehearsed it 1,000 times so that the deciding part of you is free to think about the fire. I came down the ladders against a river of men coming up, and I found my repair locker forming on me in the passageway, pulling on gear, and I found my leading chief with his face already set. Ma'am, he said, it's flashing over down there, and we're not accounting for everybody. That last sentence is the one that changes everything. A fire in an empty space is a problem of equipment and boundaries. A fire with people still inside it is a different kind of problem, and it asks a different kind of question, and the question does not care how tired you are. How many? I said. 2, maybe 3. We're still counting. Then we go in low, I said. On me. What happens in the next 90 seconds is the thing all the drills are for. You do not rise to the occasion. You do not become brave. You fall back on training so deep that your hands know the sequence before your mind catches up. Breathing apparatus checked and donned. Hose team charged and bled of air so the line does not buck when the water hits. Boundaries set in the surrounding compartments, other teams cooling the bulkheads on the far side so the fire cannot walk into the rest of the ship while we fought it in the front. A man on the sound-powered phones relaying to Damage Control Central and up to the bridge so that the captain 2 decks above knew, in something close to real time, what his DCA was about to do with the lives in her charge. It is a machine made of frightened people doing precise things in the correct order, and when it works, it is the most beautiful thing I have ever been part of. And it was working. I remember the heat coming up through the deck plates into my knees. I remember the sound, which is not a roar the way the movies have it, but a kind of vast tearing hiss, the noise of a thing eating oxygen faster than the space can supply it. I remember my leading chief's hand finding my shoulder rig in the smoke. Not to stop me, not yet. Just to keep contact, because in that blackness, the only thing you have is the man next to you and the line in your hand. And you do not let go of either. There is a thing families do when they sense a table has turned strange under them, and it is not to get quiet. It is to get louder, because the loudness is how they push the strangeness back outside where it belongs. Back in the ballroom, my cousin Bradley had noticed the young sailor Simmons looking at me with something that was starting to resemble respect, and Bradley did not like it, so he leaned across the table to fix it. Don't be too impressed by the outfit, kid, Bradley told him, jerking his chin at me. She types. That's the big secret. My cousin's basically a secretary who gets to wear a costume. The whole Navy thing is honestly a little bit welfare when you think about it. Tax dollars. Simmons's ears went red. He was maybe 20. He looked at Bradley and he looked at me, and I watched him try to work out the math of a room in which a civilian was allowed to say that, and a commander was just sitting there letting him. Petty Officer Simmons, I said, before he could do anything that would cost him later. There's a carving station by the far wall and it's about to close. Go get yourself some of the prime rib while it's hot. That's not a suggestion. He went, gratefully, because I had given him a way to leave the table that was also an order. And an order is a mercy when a room has become unbearable and you are too junior to walk away on your own. Lorraine watched him go. My aunt had a look on her face that I had seen on her 100 times over the years, the look of a person who is uncomfortable and has decided that the discomfort is the price of peace and will therefore say nothing. She had heard the family story about me told at every holiday for 18 years, and she had never once said, stop. She was not cruel, she was just quiet in the exact place where quiet does damage. "Dennis," she said now softly. "Maybe that's enough." "I'm complimenting her," Dennis said, which was not true, and which he half believed anyway. "I'm saying it's nice she can be part of something, even if we all know how she got here." How I got there. I got there because 8 weeks earlier, the Office of the Chief of Naval Operations had sent an invitation to my command, addressed to me by name and rank, asking that Commander Sloan attend as a guest of the service, and I had almost declined. And then some soft, stubborn part of me had thought, for once, that I would like my mother to see the world I actually lived in, even if she never understood what she was looking at. So I had bought 4 extra seats. I had brought my mother and my uncle and my aunt and my cousin to a Navy ball as my guests on my invitation, and my uncle was at this moment explaining to a Navy petty officer that I was there on charity. I have thought a great deal since about why I brought them. It would be tidy to say I did it to prove something, but that is not true, or it is only the smallest part of the truth. I brought them because 18 years is a long time to be 2 different people, the daughter at the holidays and the commander at sea, and I was tired in a way that goes past the body. I had some soft hope, the kind you do not admit even to yourself, that if my mother could just sit in the room, just breathe the air of the place where I was respected, something might land in her without my having to say a word. I did not want to give a speech. I have never wanted to give the speech. I wanted them to walk into my life the way you walk into a room, and see it, and understand on their own. It was, I can see now, a naive thing to want from people who had spent 18 years perfecting the art of not seeing me. But you do not stop wanting your family to see you just because they have proven they will not. That wanting is one of the last things to go, and mine had not gone yet. Dennis reached for the wine again. "I'm just saying," he said, to no one, to everyone. "It must be nice to play dress up on the taxpayer and have your mother cover the rest." My mother's hands went still on the napkin. She was looking at me with a small frown, the frown of a person who has heard a note that is slightly wrong and cannot place the instrument. She had started, I think somewhere below her own awareness, to notice how the sailors moved around me. She said nothing, but the frown stayed. He did not know he was doing it. That is the thing about a man like my cousin. Bradley was not evil. He had simply been raised inside the family story the way a fish is raised inside water, and he had never once been given a reason to question it, and cruelty that has never been questioned does not feel like cruelty from the inside. It feels like just telling it how it is. I had watched him grow up saying the things his father said, in the cadence his father said them, and I had long ago stopped expecting him to find his own opinion of me under all the inherited ones. That night I still did not expect it. I only wanted to keep a 20-year-old sailor from getting caught in the blast radius of a family that did not know it was standing next to a fuse. In 2010, the space was too hot to stand up in. We went in on our knees, staying low under the heat layer where the air was survivable and the visibility was nothing, feeling along the deck plates. The book, the actual doctrine, tells you to fight a main space fire from the boundaries, to seal it and cool the surrounding compartments and starve it. The book is right. The book is written to keep damage control teams alive. The book also quietly assumes that everybody made it out of the space before you sealed it. 2 men had not made it out, and so the book and I were going to have a disagreement. I told you the family story is about who paid, and it is, but underneath it, there is a truer story about who decided. And the truer story is the one I have never told at a dinner table. In 2010, on my knees in that space, with the heat pressing down like a hand, I made a decision that was mine to make and no one else's. I had 2 sailors unaccounted for behind a wall of smoke. I had a boundary I could hold and a captain 2 decks up who had given me the space to call it. And I decided we were going in for them, and I decided, it knowing the number that any damage control officer carries, which is that the space that kills the people already inside it will just as happily kill the people you send in after them. I got 2 out, is how I have said it on the rare occasions I have said it at all. I have counted to 3 every day since. We found the first man, Petty Officer Cardenas, down and not moving near the lower level, and we got a hold of him and dragged him back toward the boundary along the path we had felt our way in on. because in that smoke, the path in is the only map you have. He came around at the boundary, coughing so hard I thought his body would break, and the first thing he said, when he could say anything, was 2 words. "You came back," he said. We went in again for the second man, Ensign Reyes, a brand new officer on his first ship, 22 years old, and we found him and we brought him out too. And he lived, and he has 3 children now, and every year on the anniversary, he sends me a message that just says thank you, and I just send back 1 word, which is anytime, and we both know it is the truth. And there was a third man, Fireman Delgado, 19 years old, from a town in the valley I could find on a map in the dark. We went back in a third time. The space would not let us reach him. The heat had won that part of the compartment, and my leading chief put his hand on my shoulder rig and said the sentence that a good chief will say to a young officer to save her life and her soul at the same time, which was, "Ma'am, he's gone, and I am not letting you make it too." And he was right, and I have hated that he was right for 16 years, and I have also known every single day that he saved my life by being right. We saved the ship. We saved 2 of the 3. The fire went out because a lot of exhausted people fought it for hours and did not stop. And a boy from the valley did not come home, and I signed the part of the report that had his name in it, and I flew to see his mother, and I have never in my life been able to make the number 2 feel like enough. I flew out to the valley 3 weeks after, once the ship was safe and the investigation had run its course, and I could get the leave. I did not tell the Navy I was going. I did not tell my family anything at all, because by then the family story was already set, and there was no version of what I would have said that fit inside it. I sat in a small kitchen that smelled of coffee and a wood stove, and I told Delgado's mother what her son had been like on the ship, the way he made the mid-watch bearable, the way he was studying for a rating exam he was going to pass. I told her the truth, which was that we went back for him 3 times, and she held my hands across the table, this woman who had lost her boy, and she comforted me, which is a thing I did not deserve and have never forgotten. She said, "You went back 3 times. And I said yes. And she said, "Then he was not alone at the end. Somebody was trying to reach him. A mother can live on that." I have carried that kitchen for 16 years alongside the fire. It is the only thing anyone has ever given me that made the number 2 survivable. That is the ribbon on my chest. That is the thing my uncle believed was a costume. Now put the 2 rooms next to each other, because that is where I was standing all night, in both of them at once. In the ballroom, Rear Admiral Whitfield set down his glass. I saw him do it. I saw him reach out and put the wine glass on the tablecloth with the particular care of a man whose hands have suddenly become unreliable and who does not want to knock anything over. I saw him say something to the captain beside him, a short something, and I saw him push his chair back and stand up. You have to understand what it means for the guest of honor to stand up in the middle of the program at his own event. The room is built around him. The evening is his. When he stands, unscheduled, 40 pairs of eyes track him, and then 80. And then the whole ballroom begins to turn, the way water turns when something large moves underneath it. My family still did not understand. Dennis had his back half to the head table and was reaching for the wine bottle. Bradley was texting. Lorraine had noticed something in my face and was frowning at it. My mother had stopped folding her napkin. "Vivian," my mother said quietly, "why is that man looking at you like that?" It was the first real question anyone in my family had asked me in 18 years, and I did not get to answer it because the Admiral had begun to walk. I made my own decision then, the small twin of the one I made on my knees in the smoke. I decided I was not going to perform this. I was not going to stand up and announce myself and watch my uncle's face fall and take the cheap, sweet thing that was being offered to me, which was a public victory over a small man. I had wanted that, God forgive me, some nights I had wanted it very badly, but I had learned the difference between winning a room and keeping your soul, and I had paid too much for my soul on a night 16 years ago to sell it back for the price of my uncle's expression. So I set my napkin on the table. I stood up quietly to meet him, the way you stand to meet a senior officer, out of respect and nothing else. And I turned to the young sailor who had just come back with his plate of prime rib and was standing there frozen with it, and I said the only coaching I had time for. "Whatever happens next, Simmons, stay polite. That man earned every bit of what's about to happen. So did the men who aren't here. He crossed the room. He did not hurry, exactly, but he did not stop for anyone, and people got out of his way, which is a thing that happens around admirals without anyone deciding it. He came down off the rise and across the dance floor and around the end of 2 tables, and the whole ballroom came with him in the sense that everyone was now watching to see where a 2-star admiral was going in such a hurry in the middle of his own dinner. He stopped in front of our table. He did not look at my uncle. He did not look at my cousin or my aunt or my mother. He looked at me, and up close I could see that his eyes were wet and his jaw was working the way a man's does when he is trying to keep his voice in a place he can control. "Commander Sloan," he said. His voice was not steady. A 2-star admiral in front of 1,000 people, and his voice was not steady. "Admiral," I said. "It's good to see you, sir." "I have been trying to buy you a drink," he said, "for 16 years. And then a great many things happened at once, the way they do when a room finally understands something all at the same time. At the tables around us, sailors were getting to their feet. Not all at once and not on any order, but in ones and twos, the ones who were old enough to know the story, the chiefs and the senior officers, the ones for whom the phrase Main Space Fire 2010 was not history, but scripture. An older Master Chief named Bristol, a barrel of a man with more than 30 years in, stood up at the next table and came to a kind of attention that no one had called for. And I watched the younger sailors around him see him do it and scramble to their feet because a Master Chief had stood, and you stand when the Master Chief stands, even if you do not yet know why. And my Uncle Dennis, who had just gotten the wine bottle open and taken a triumphant forkful of his dinner, made a sound. He choked on his food, genuinely choked, a hard, wet cough into his napkin, his face going red because he had inhaled at exactly the moment the world he had built for 18 years came apart, and his body had simply refused to do 2 impossible things at once. Bradley thumped him on the back. Dennis waved him off, eyes streaming, staring up at the Admiral standing over our table, at the 2 stars, at the wet eyes of a flag officer who had crossed a ballroom for the niece. Dennis had just called a freeloader. "Sir," I said to the Admiral, because I could see he was struggling, and I did not want him to have to carry the whole thing alone. "You didn't need to get up. I'd have found you after." "No," Whitfield said. "No, you would have stood in the corner and let me miss you, the way you've let everybody miss you for 16 years. Not tonight." He looked for the first time at my family, at the choking uncle and the frozen cousin, and the 2 women with their hands at their mouths, and he seemed to understand something about the table he had walked up to. "I don't know who these people are to you," he said, "but they should know who you are." "They're my family," I said. Something crossed his face when I said it. He was quiet for a second. Then he did the thing I will remember longest, longer than the standing room, longer than my uncle's red streaming face. He turned to Master Chief Bristol, who was still standing there at his unbidden attention, and he said, "Master Chief, these good people don't seem to know the story. Would you do me the honor?" And Bristol, who had a voice like a diesel engine and had clearly been waiting his whole life to tell it, told it. "Main machinery room fire, O200, spring of 2010. Master Chief Bristol said, to my family, in the plain flat cadence of a man reading a casualty report. Class Bravo, fuel and heat down in the deepest space on the ship, the kind of fire that takes a destroyer to the bottom if the wrong people are running the response." The ballroom had gone quiet around us. People were listening now, the way a crowd listens when it realizes it is getting the real thing and not the program. "3 men trapped in the space," Bristol said. "Doctrine says you seal it. Doctrine says you cool the boundaries and you let it burn and you do not send anybody down into a flashing over main space. Doctrine is written by smart people, and it is usually right, and it would have cost us 3 sailors that night." The damage control assistant made a different call. She went in, low, on her knees, no visibility, into a space that was killing the men already in it. And she brought 2 of them back out with her own hands. He paused. The 3rd one she could not reach. She went back for him 3 times. Her chief had to physically stop her from making it 4. I know, because I was that chief. I had not known, until that sentence, that the man was on the ship. 16 years, and the Master Chief, who had put his hand on my shoulder rig and saved my life, was standing 4 feet from my uncle, telling my family the thing I had never been able to say. My eyes went hot. I kept my hands at my sides. The room had filled in behind Bristol without my noticing. There were more sailors on their feet now than in their chairs. A commander I did not know, a woman about my age with a submariner's dolphins on her chest, had come partway across the floor and stopped. One hand pressed flat over her ribbons, in the reflexive posture of a person hearing the name of a thing she had read about at the schoolhouse and never expected to stand in a room with. That is the part I did not anticipate, and could not have performed if I had tried. You cannot fake a room of professionals recognizing one of their own. It does not run on manners. It runs on the plain fact that every one of them had done the drills, had knelt in a smoke-filled trainer, had felt in their own knees exactly what it would take to do the thing Bristol was describing, and had wondered, the way we all wonder, whether they would have gone in. They were not standing for me exactly. They were standing for the answer to that question, made flesh at a dinner table, and being called a freeloader. 2 men are alive tonight who would be dead, Bristol said. One of them made it to lieutenant commander. One of them has 3 kids. There is a ship still in the fleet that would be a reef right now. And the reason for all of that is sitting at this table, and you called her a woman who lives on handouts. He said the last word like it tasted bad. Ma'am, begging your pardon, but somebody at this table needed to hear it out loud. Dennis had stopped choking. He was very pale now, the red drained out of him, and he was looking at me the way you look at a familiar object that has turned out to be something else entirely. A coat on a hook that is suddenly a person standing in the dark. You never said anything, he said. His voice had no bottom in it. In 18 years, you never once said. I looked at my uncle for a long moment. There were 100 cruel, true things I could have said, and I had rehearsed most of them at one time or another, on long watches and longer nights. You never asked me a single question you didn't already have the answer to, I said. That was all. It was enough. It was, I think, the truest sentence I have ever said to him. And the Admiral, quietly, to me alone, said, 3 of you went in. I read the report 100 times. I always hated that I couldn't fix the number. 3 of us went in, Admiral, I said. I only brought 2 out. I've made my peace with the arithmetic. It's the pretending it never happened I couldn't keep doing. What happened next moved through my family the way water moves through a ship that has taken damage, finding every low compartment, filling the spaces no one thought about. Bradley put his phone down. He did not pick it up again for the rest of the night, which for my cousin was a form of shock. He kept starting to say something and stopping, because every sentence he had ever said about me had just been shown to him from the outside, and he was hearing his own voice for the first time and not liking the sound of it. Once, near the end, he did manage to get a whole sentence out. He leaned toward me while the Admiral was talking to my mother, and he said, "Low, not for the table." I told a Navy guy you type, 2 minutes ago, right before. He stopped. Petty Officer Simmons, I told him you type. He said it like a man reading his own charge sheet. I understood what he was actually asking, which was whether there was any floor under him at all, or whether he was going to fall the whole way through the way his father was falling. My cousin is not a good man yet, but that night for the first time he was an honest one, and honesty is where the road out starts. You did, I said. You want to fix it? Find Simmons before you leave. Not me, him. You said it to him. You make it right with him. Bradley nodded slowly, and later at the coat check, I saw him do it. Saw him find the young sailor and say something with his eyes down, and saw Simmons nod, awkward and decent about it, and it was a small thing, and it was the first thing I ever watched my cousin do entirely on his own. Lorraine was crying, not performing it, just leaking steadily, her hand over her mouth, staring at me, and I understood that my aunt was not crying because she had learned I was a hero. She was crying because she had spent 18 years in a room where a lie about someone she loved was told over and over, and she had chosen quiet every time. And the bill for all that quiet had just been laid on the table in front of her, in a Master Chief's diesel voice. Dennis was trying to find his footing. A man like my uncle has built his whole self on a foundation, and the foundation had just been shown to be sand, and he was doing what such men do, which is to reach for the nearest handhold to keep from feeling himself fall. "Why would you let us think it?" he said. "All these years, if it was a lie, why would you sit there and let all of us?" "Because the truth had a price I wasn't willing to make my mother pay," I said. "You want to know why I never told you about the medal? Because to tell you about the medal, I would have had to tell you about Delgado. And I was not going to turn a 19-year-old boy who didn't come home into a story I told to win an argument at Thanksgiving. He deserved better than to be my evidence. The table was silent, and into that silence my mother spoke, and what she said rearranged the last piece of the family that was still standing. "Dennis," Rosemary said. Her voice was small, but it did not shake. "There's something I have to tell you, and I should have told you years ago, and I didn't, and that's my sin, not hers." "Rosemary," Dennis started. "She sent me money," my mother said. "Vivian did, for years, after Walter died. The mortgage, the second surgery, the roof. It was her. It was always her." She was not looking at Dennis anymore. She was looking at me, and there were 18 years in her face. "I let you all believe it went the other way. I let you think I was carrying her because it was easier than telling my brother-in-law that my daughter was carrying me. I was ashamed, and she let me have that because that is who she is, and I have never once deserved it." The bill they had claimed to pay for 18 years had been running in the opposite direction the entire time, and my mother had just read the true balance out loud to the man who wrote the false one. I reached over and put my hand on my mother's hand, the one that was not folding a napkin anymore. "It was never a debt, Mom," I said. "You don't have to feel it as a debt. I never sent it as one." I needed air after that, so I stepped out. There was a balcony off the ballroom that looked over the harbor, and the June night was cool coming off the water, and I stood at the rail with the city lights on the far shore and let the noise of the room fall away behind me. The medal was never the point. I want to be very clear about that, because it is the thing people get wrong when they hear a story like this. They think the point is the vindication, the standing room, the uncle's red face. Those things happened, and I would be lying if I said no part of me was glad. But they were not the point, and if you build your peace on them, you will always be hungry, because there is never enough of that kind of thing to fill the hole it is trying to fill. The point was a boy named Delgado, 19 years old, and the fact that I had carried him alone for 16 years, and that carrying him alone was somehow easier than trying to explain to people who had already decided I was nothing, why I sometimes went quiet at holidays, why I flinched at certain smells, why I could not watch certain movies. It is a strange thing to say, but the family story protected me in a way. As long as they thought I was a lazy woman who lived off her mother, they never asked what was actually wrong, and I never had to find out whether they were capable of holding the real answer. The balcony door opened behind me. I knew who it was before he spoke, by the pause, by the way a senior man stands near a rail before he says the thing he came out to say. "You carried him this whole time," Whitfield said, coming to stand beside me at the rail, "and you let them call it laziness." "It was easier than explaining what tired really means," I said. He was quiet for a while. 2 ships were working their way out of the harbor below us, running lights green and red, and we both watched them the way sailors watch any ship, automatically, reading them. "I tried to find you," he said, "after I got the star. I wanted you at the change of command. I wanted you at 3 of them. My people could never get past your commands. You kept sliding out of every event where anyone might stand up and say what you did. I used to think you were shy." He shook his head. "You weren't shy. You were carrying a 19-year-old up a ladder for 16 years, and you didn't want anybody to make it into a party." "He was a good sailor," I said. "He'd have been a better one than me, given time." "I doubt that very much," Whitfield said. "But I understand why you'd need to believe it." He told me then something I had not known. He said that for the first 2 years after the fire, he had written me a letter every anniversary and never sent a single one, because he could not find the words that would not sound like he was asking me to make him feel better about a decision he had put on my shoulders. He had been the captain. He had given a 25-year-old lieutenant junior grade the authority to send teams into a main space, and it had been the right call, and it had cost a life, and he had carried his own version of the arithmetic for 16 years, 2 decks up from mine. I had never once thought about that. I had spent all that time believing I was the only one on the ship still counting to 3, and it turned out the captain had a stack of unsent letters in a drawer that said otherwise. "I kept them," he said. "The letters. I brought one tonight, if you can believe it. I've carried the thing to 4 of these dinners, hoping you'd be at one of them." He touched his breast pocket and then decided against it. "I'll mail it. It'll mean more with a stamp on it than handed to you at a party, but I want you to have it. It has his name in it." I never wanted his name to only live in the report. "Send it," I said. My own voice was not steady now either. "I'd like to read his name in something that isn't a report." We stood there. He did not fill the silence with comfort, which was its own kind of comfort, because the people who have been in the worst rooms with you never try to talk you out of the weight. They just stand next to it with you, so it is not only yours. You brought 2 men home who would not be here, he said finally. That is a fact, Commander. It does not erase the third. Nothing will ever erase the third, but it is a fact, and you are allowed to set it down next to the other one and let them both be true. Being believed did not bring the third man out. I knew that standing on that balcony as surely as I know it now. But the room behind me was finally quiet enough that I could hear myself mourn him, instead of spending all my strength holding a wall against people who had decided I was nothing. And that turned out to be a gift I had not known I was allowed to want. The rest of the evening resolved the way real things resolve, which is unevenly, in the coat room and the corners, not in one grand scene. Lorraine found me by the coat check. There was no audience there, which mattered, because an apology with an audience is at least half performance, and my aunt had the decency to find me where no one could see her do it. I heard it for years, she said. The way he talks about you. I heard it at every holiday, and I never once said stop. I told myself it kept the peace. It didn't keep any peace, it just kept me comfortable. She was twisting the strap of her purse. I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight. I'm just saying it. I should have said it 18 years ago. I'm saying it now. That is the part that actually matters, and I told her so. The insult was never really the wound, Aunt Lorraine, I said. The wound was that a whole room could hear it, and nobody ever said stop. You just said stop, you said it late, but you said it. That's the part that counts. Start there. She nodded, and she cried a little more, and she hugged me, and it was not everything, but it was real, and real is enough to build on. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to make my aunt the villain, and she was not the villain. Lorraine never once threw the insult. In 18 years, I never heard a cruel word about me come out of her mouth. Her failure was quieter than that, and in some ways, more common, which is why I am telling you about it. She was the person in the room who knew it was wrong and decided that keeping the peace was worth more than saying so. Most rooms where a lie gets told about someone have a Lorraine in them, someone whose silence is the floor the whole thing stands on. The person shouting the insult could not shout it alone. He needs a table that will not object. My aunt had been that table for 18 years, and the thing that undid her that night was not learning I was a hero. It was realizing that her quiet had a weight, that it had been holding something up all along, and that she could have set it down at any holiday she chose and never had. Dennis found me last, at the door, and my uncle being my uncle, he tried to do it big. He squared up in the doorway with people still filing past, and he began, in a voice pitched to Carrie, Vivian, I owe you an apology, and I want everyone here to know that I said it, that I stood up and admitted that a man can be big enough to. Not here, I said. He stopped. Not here, with everyone watching you be sorry, I said quietly, so that he had to stop performing and lean in to hear me. That's just the same thing pointed the other direction. You standing up in a doorway so people can watch you be a big man, that's the exact move that got us here. If you're actually sorry, it'll survive a phone call with no audience. Call me when it's just a phone and no one's watching. I'll answer. That's a real door. I'm leaving it open. But you have to walk through it when nobody's clapping. He looked at me. For the first time in 18 years, I think my uncle actually saw me, saw the whole person, and not the convenient shape, and it clearly hurt, and I did not enjoy that it hurt, which surprised me a little. I don't understand you, he said finally, and there was no cruelty in it, just a tired honesty. I never did. I know, I said. You could, though. The door's open. That part's up to you now. I did not owe my family a reconciliation. I want to be clear about that too, because someone hearing this is going to feel like they owe their people a warm ending. You do not owe anyone a reconciliation. The one I offered was a gift, not a debt, and the reason I could offer it freely was precisely that I did not owe it. You can only truly give what you were never obligated to hand over. I had orders in my coat pocket that night to a new posting, a big staff job, the kind that comes with more weight and more distance from the water than I like. I had folded the orders into my inside pocket before I left the hotel room, out of some habit of keeping the important paper on my body, and I felt them there against my chest as I walked out of the ballroom, next to where the ribbon sits on the outside of the coat. I went out the front, past the flags and the side boys who had long since been dismissed, into the June night. The valet brought my car around. Behind me, the ball was still going, the band starting up again, the program resuming now that the guest of honor had returned to his seat, the great machinery of an evening closing back over the hole that had opened in the middle of it. My mother rode home with me. She did not say much, and neither did I, and that was all right. At a red light, she reached over and put her hand on my sleeve, on the 3 gold stripes, and left it there. And I understood that she was reading them, the way you read something in the dark, with your hands, because you have finally been given permission to know what it is. "I'm sorry it took me 18 years, she said. "You got there," I said. "A lot of people never do." The light turned green. I drove us home through the quiet streets with her hand on my sleeve the whole way, and neither of us filled the silence. And for the first time in 18 years, the silence between my mother and me was not made of a thing we were both agreeing not to say. It was just quiet. It was the quiet of 2 people who no longer needed to manage anything. And I had forgotten that such a quiet was even possible with her, and I held on to the steering wheel and the feeling of her hand and let myself have it. If you have been the freeloader in someone else's mouth, the deadbeat at the reunion, the one they decided about a long time ago and never looked at again, I want to say one thing to you, and then I will let you go. You do not owe the people who decided who you are a performance to prove them wrong. You do not have to earn back a fair look by winning some public scene. Live the truth quietly. Do the work in the rooms where the work is the only thing that counts. Carry what you have to carry. And trust that the right room, the one that actually knows what a thing costs, will stand up on its own when the time comes without you ever having to ask it to. I know how hard that is to believe when you are inside it. When the person shouting is family, when the table is full of people who will not say stop, it feels like the lie will outlast you, like you will go to your grave as the freeloader in your uncle's mouth, and the true thing you did will die with the 2 men who remember it. I felt that for 18 years. I want to tell you it was not true, and it was not, but I also will not pretend the standing room is guaranteed. Some of you will do the quiet, true work your whole lives and never get the ballroom. That is the harder version, and it is real, and I will not sell you a promise the world does not keep. But here's the part the world does keep. Whether or not the room ever stands, you get to stop performing. You get to set down the exhausting work of managing other people's wrong idea of you, and you get to spend that strength on the actual load instead, on the people and the work and the grief that are really yours. The relief I felt on that balcony was not that I had finally won. It was that I could finally stop defending a wall and turn around and look at what the wall had been hiding and mourn it properly. That relief does not require an Admiral. You can give it to yourself tonight. I went into a fire once for 3 men, and I brought out 2, and I have made my peace with the arithmetic of that night, hard as it is. What I could not make peace with, in the end, was pretending it never happened, letting a small, comfortable lie stand in the place where a 19-year-old boy and 2 living men and 1 very long night should have been. So I stopped pretending. Not to win, just to stop. I begged for nothing. I never had, and in the end, when it mattered, the room stood up anyway. That is the whole of it. Thank you for sitting with me while I told it. Take care of the people who go into the fire for you. And if you are one of the ones who goes in, take care of yourself too, because the arithmetic is easier to carry when you are not carrying it alone.